Over the last number of decades, the province of Quebec has become increasingly secular and also hostile to displays of religious beliefs and affiliations. Bill 21 was passed a few years ago, and certain public sector workers are now forbidden to wear religious symbols while on the job. Is this a form of religious discrimination, and is this what we want to see in our nation? Joining us from Quebec to discuss this further is Samuel Bachand, who is the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms Director for French Canada. Samuel, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
So first off, can you refresh our viewers as to what Bill 21 is and why the Quebec provincial government had to use the notwithstanding clause to pass the bill into law?
Yes, well, I think it's quite straightforward. So the government of Quebec has enacted the La Loi sur la laïcité, so the act on the laicity of the state, to make it mandatory for all public servants in authority or position of authority not to wear any ostensible or visible religious symbol, and not provide any service with their face covered for reasons of, religious affiliation. So basically, that's it. We've the Superior Court of Quebec has rendered a judgment in 2021, if I recall well, that declared this, valid because of a notwithstanding clause that we might talk about. So basically, there is an exemption clause that was enacted by the legislature of Quebec, l'Assemblée nationale, and the only two elements that were left out because they are not subject to that notwithstanding clause are basically the confessional or the Catholic and Protestant school boards and the elected members of different levels of provincial government, including the Assemblée nationale. So that's where we are.
And what has the overall response been to Bill 21 from the minority of residents affected by it, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Sikhs, and others?
Well, we don't hear much about them on the French side, at least. So
Wow.
they haven't been very forceful in their resistance, I gotta say. But they are not that different from Christians in general. If we were to compare them to the, let's say, the historical majority.
So many people may see Bill 21 as a form of religious persecution. One particular symbol I wanted to ask you about is the use of the ichthys symbol, or as some call it, the Jesus fish symbol. This was used as a code by Christians to meet during times of persecution. So does the Quebec government recognize that as a religious symbol, and are they forbidding it?
Well, honestly, I couldn't say because I never saw a case in administrative law or before the courts that dealt with that. But obviously, it would be included.
Wow.
That being said, I'm not sure where it would apply. If we're talking about a school teacher or public servant wearing it, on a necklace or something, well, there it might apply. But if it's on a car, generally speaking, is one's private property, it doesn't apply at all. So I'm not aware of issues about that precisely. I gotta say though, I'm Catholic, and the Catholic Church has not intervened in the constitutional challenge of Bill 21. And it looks from afar, and I don't read minds, but it looks like the Catholic Church just signed a Faustian bargain there, because in Christians don't have, or I'll speak for Catholics, we don't have an obligation to wear or display Christian symbols in general. So this bill is more of an attack on either Sikhs or certain Muslims, especially women, or maybe Protestant Christians who tend to display more, or who are more inclined to display religious symbols in the public sphere. But you know, the Catholic Church was nowhere to be seen.
Now, any idea why so many Quebecers support Bill 21 and see this law as being neutral? What kind of benefits do they see for the province by banning public sector workers from wearing religious symbols while at work?
Well, you know, it's probably because of well, let's go back in time. Quebec, for the most part of its, the greater part of its history, was a Catholic, was dominated or majoritarily Catholic, obviously, and it's almost tried to say it, but in the 60s, we lived through the Quiet Revolution. So the French Canadians in Quebec, who were overwhelmingly Catholic, just rejected their religion and chose instead to plead allegiance, if I may say, to the provincial state, which was then, basically laicized or non-confessional. And there was this transfer from the proto-state, which was Catholic since 1759, basically, until the early 60s, and the whole, again, the allegiance, the cohesive factor of French Canada was transferred to the provincial state. And then, as we say in French, on a jeté le bébé avec l'eau du bain. So we threw out the baby with the bathwater. So that's what happened. And now you can only basically Bill 21 is just a logical consequence of that rejection of Catholic values. And again, since Quebecers have, massively moved away from Christianity and Catholicism, they have also rejected in a very forceful manner all sorts of other religions, especially um, the, the Muslims, basically. So that's what we're seeing. And I think that if you just look at I'm not talking about bad faith. I think the rejection of religion is just wall to wall in Quebec. But if you look at the Bill 21, what you'll notice is that objectively it's more of a constraint on Muslims than on Christians, and it's more of constraints on Sikhs, which are very few in Quebec. So I'm not saying that they weren't even on the radar, but obviously it's more of a constraint on them also.
Now, what would opponents of Bill 21 say about possible security concerns of religious wardrobes that cover the entire face so that someone's identity would not be discernible? Like, for example, if the individual is a police officer with their entire face covered, could that certainly be problematic?
Well, obviously it would be problematic since the role of a police officer is somewhat, uh, uh, public and must be transparent. Um, Look, it's not for me to judge what the precise balance or the adequate balance is to be. And I guess that will be determined in the next 50, 100 years, whatever. But back, ah, that must be 10, 15 years ago, we had the Bouchard-Taylor Commission in Quebec regarding precisely this issue. And the consensus in Quebec, at least, was that policemen and judges and prosecutors were not to wear religious garb or religious symbols at all. And the others, that was to be about fine tuning. The solution chosen by the Legault government was to ban religious symbols wall to wall, which is much more radical. But again, if we're talking about all all positions that are associated to the monopoly or the state monopoly over force, then I think we have broader consensus in Quebec, and by the way, in Canada at large. I'm sure if you just ran a survey, that when it comes to judges, policemen, and such roles similar to that, then we're better off with no symbols at all, because it's too charged, or yes, basically that's the problem.
I'm told that in Quebec, it's not just Bill 21 that is of concern, but apparently there are other laws that restrict religious freedoms and speech. If so, can you share some examples?
Well, look, as you know, we've had the Bill 101 since, well, it's been a few decades now. And the Bill 96 has, let's say, restricted linguistic freedoms even more recently. So, let's say in the realm of workplace law, if you want to hire personnel or staff, well, you have to justify under even more stringent standards your decision to hire a bilingual uh, employee. That's one instance. But basically, you know Bill 101. It's official bilingualism in the province of Quebec in the matters that relate to the provincial jurisdiction, and it's just been reinforced. So, look, I'm not here to bash my fellow Quebecers. I think Quebec has a better cohesion and has probably a brighter future than the whole of Canada, because the whole of Canada is right now just exploding. I'm not sure there's the social cohesion needed to carry on for 500 years. But again, in Quebec, we're dealing with a form of tribalism that is not compatible with the Canadian experience. So at some point, Quebecers who decided twice not to secede or separate from Canada will have to decide, are they some sort of population in an Aboriginal reserve or a zoo, or uh, are they going to participate in the broader Canadian deal? And if they intend to participate in the broader Canadian deal or project, well, Bill 96 and Bill 21 are not good ideas.
Right now, I understand that you'll be one of the speakers at the Religious Freedom Summit in Ottawa on February 4th. Very quickly, can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, it'll be a talk mostly about the constitutional and legal issues that have arisen in the last 20 years. So, state neutrality, as defined by the Supreme Court of Canada, Bill 21, we discussed it just in the past few minutes. And also, since I have, substantial experience and knowledge of it, the recent evolution and developments in or within the Catholic Church, which, although it is not, let's say, uh, authoritative, or it's not a real social player or actor anymore in Quebec, remains very prevalent in the news for bad reasons. And I think that that phenomenon, uh, which we can relate or link back to Rome right now, is detrimental to the whole of Christendom and the whole of the Christian communities in Quebec and Canada. So I think this is an element that I'll be elaborating upon.
We're out of time, but thanks so much for being with us today, Samuel. We really appreciate having you on our show today.
Thank you.